Greetings and welcome to this training session sponsored by the Mises Caucus. I'm honored to be asked to do this training. We're going to be talking about building your campaign team today. You know, Western Liberty Network is the organization I represent. I'm the executive director. And as a 501c3 organization, we do not and cannot endorse any political candidate or oppose any political candidate. That said, it's at a personal level. I actually am a registered libertarian, have been since 1990, have run campaigns and been elected to office. And so it's really nice to speak to fellow Mises Caucus members, and it's really nice to do some training to some fellow libertarians. This training is applicable to any kind of race and is available to everyone. And so I want to encourage everyone to take advantage of the resources that I'm going to offer you today, and also the resources that are offered to you by the organizations you belong to, in this case, the Mises Caucus itself. I'm going to begin by showing you what some of those resources are. They're all free, and you can take advantage of them however you like. So I'm going to share the screen here. And this is the Western Liberty Network website. I want to show you that website in particular because of the resources that it offers. Here, you can look at some of the trainings we provide, similar to the one tonight. This talks about conferences we have held, and there are various resources available on the side here, recordings from different conferences that we have held, PowerPoint presentations on different topics, like in this case, how to use social media for your campaign. And if you decide you want more training materials, go to the top and go to our training page. On the training page, you'll see 3 sections. This first section here talks about the kind of training that Western Liberty Network provides. And then down here are a series of companion training documents you can download on any of these topics. I'm going to offer you one of them tonight, but from this site, you can download any of these as you wish. They are designed to be provided with a live training, but they do stand up on their own, and they're all very useful. And if you decide you like any of them, you can download them all with one click. Download a PDF file containing all of the above training documents, and you can download our entire library of training documents, which is uploaded all the time. And here you're going to find various training sessions that we record, and we're going to post the Mises Caucus ones if we get permission to do that. But we have over 2 years of training on a variety of topics, and all of this is available absolutely free of charge. You can take a look at them, download them, view them anytime you like, as often as you like. And if you want to make a tax-deductible contribution and you support what Western Liberty Network does, you can click on Support WLN tab, and you can make a one-time or a monthly contribution at that point. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I'm going to begin our training on how to build a campaign team. Now, there's a book, I don't know any of you have read it, Stephen Colbert, the comedian. He's not a libertarian, but he does have some interesting and humorous things to say. And he wrote a book called America, Democracy in Action, which I think was kind of a clever title. And he had a page on building your campaign team. I don't condone this page per se, but it is humorous. And I thought it might be a kick for some of you to read with respect to this topic. So I'm going to try to add the file. Let's see. Okay, here it is. The file is called Campaign Team. And so not part of the curriculum tonight, but go ahead and download it and look at it at your leisure. It's pretty hilarious. And there's a grain of truth in it, particularly for high-level campaigns. So I think you'll enjoy that. The file that I do condone, which contains information about tonight's training session, I'm going to send up to you right now. And that was called Building Your Campaign Team. And that is up there. So you can download it and follow along if you like, or you can look at it at your leisure. Now, the campaign team, let me ask, first of all, how many of you on the call today have run a campaign before? Have run a campaign or been a candidate? I see Boyd, Baker, and Sammy. You can respond by unmuting your mic, or you can respond by participating in the meeting chat. trying to get a sense of what I'm working at here. Have not. Sammy says he has not. How about you, Boyd and Scott? Have you run?
I have not either.
Okay, and what about you,
I mean,
Scott?
I've thought about it a lot.
Okay, well, good. And Scott, how about you? Have you run for office before or managed a campaign?
Nothing at all.
Nothing at all. Okay, well, that's good. This training is designed for people who are new to politics, so I'm glad I've got the right audience here. Now, campaign team is a collection of people that will be responsible for different aspects of your political campaign. You should have a written campaign plan that clearly describes campaign objectives and outlines the positions within your campaign, including their responsibilities. We have an entire training on the elements of a good campaign plan, and I'm advising you now, first of all, if you are going to run a campaign of any kind, use a written campaign plan. Again, you can go to the training section of the westernlibertynetwork.org website and download the elements of a campaign plan. If you don't have a written campaign plan, you don't have a campaign plan. A lot of people say it's in my head, but it doesn't do a lot of good there because it's difficult to keep straight, especially during the heat of a campaign. It's much more difficult to convey. Also, if you're starting a business and you need a small business loan, you're going to go into a bank, and the first thing they're going to ask you is, where is your business plan? And if you tell them it's all in my head, they're going to laugh at you, and you will not get the business loan. Likewise, if you do not have a written campaign plan, it's going to be harder to get contributions. Instead of a $500 contribution, you might only get a $25 contribution. Instead of somebody volunteering to 40 hours, they might offer 10 hours. Whatever it is, when you have a written plan, then people will take your campaign a lot more seriously. You'll get more contributions, you'll get more participation, you'll get more hours, and you'll also have a structure to operate in. I really push the campaign plan because there's so many elements in it that are so important. Fundraising element, what are your objectives? What is it that you want to accomplish? And a very important part of the written campaign plan is the construction of your campaign team. Who is going to be on your campaign team? What will their responsibilities be? And what will the lines of authority be between who answers to who with respect to your campaign team? We're going to go over some of that. We're going to go over a lot of that today. So a question I have often asked is, what if I am running unopposed? Or what if I'm running for a low-level office that doesn't involve a lot of money? My advice to those folks is run a campaign plan anyway and build a campaign team anyway. If you are running unopposed, or if it's a very low-level office like, say, cemetery control board or a road maintenance board or one of those, it doesn't matter how high or low it is. If you build a campaign team, you are going to get the experience as a candidate working with a campaign team. And that will be experience that will be very important in the future if you run another race and you do have an opponent, or you do decide to run a higher profile race. You need that experience under your belt. Also, if you have supporters and you think you might want to run for another office someday, or maybe you don't want to run for an office, but you want to help somebody else run, or maybe you want to run a ballot measure campaign or some kind of an initiative campaign. Build a campaign team anyway and run a campaign as if you had opposition or as if it were a higher level campaign. The reason why is because in addition to you getting the experience, these other folks will get experience also. And when you run another campaign where there is resistance or there is opposition, you will have people who have a campaign under their belt. Another big advantage of building a campaign team and running a race, even if you're running a low-level campaign or you're running unopposed, is because you can make almost any mistake and it's not going to cost you because you're probably going to win. It's a free play. Being from Nebraska, I love football analogies. Sometimes there's a play in process and the defense commit a penalty, but the official doesn't blow the ball dead. It's a free play. If the offense makes a big play, then they can decline the penalty, or they can accept the penalty if the play goes bad. It's a free play. Likewise, if you are running an unopposed race, or if you were running a low-level local race, you have a free play. Take advantage of it. Use that opportunity to learn, make mistakes, and not have to pay a price. The same with your campaign team. And then in the future, when you run an opposed race, or you run, a higher level race, you and your team will not be flat-footed. You will have that bit of experience. You're going to build with a campaign. You're going to build a base of donors. You're going to build a base of volunteers. You're going to build a base of media contacts. And as is relevant to today's training, you're going to build a campaign team. So run, no matter what you do, no matter what the race is, build a campaign team, no matter what it is. And another thing that running this kind of a race in a low-level campaign or an unopposed campaign, another advantage is it shows the voters that you do not take them for granted. These are the races where you start to build a reputation for yourself. And people will say, gee, Sammy, say Sammy Baker there, Sammy, you're running a really hard campaign, but I don't understand why. You're unopposed, you're going to win. What are you doing? And you can tell them, you can say, I am running unopposed, and that's great. But I don't take the voters for granted. I want them to know who I am. I want them to know what my platform is, and I want to learn about them. And people will appreciate this answer. If it gets picked up in a news story, it makes you look great. It starts to build a reputation right away. So these are the reasons why you want to build a campaign team, even if it's a small local race, even if it is a low profile race. So that is why you want to build a campaign team in the first place. Are there any questions before I go on? And of course, you can interrupt me. I'm not the wait to the end for questions kind of guy. If you want to interrupt at any point along the way, please do so. Are there any questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so I am a stay-at-home mom, so I don't really have a lot of people where I can just pull from them. Where do you recommend getting people for a campaign?
Okay. One way to do it is family members. If you have any family members that are interested in supporting your campaign, if you don't have any family members that are suitable to help out, they're friends. Ask your friends. If you are a member of a school group, like a PTA or something like that, find some moms or dads who are, you think, sympathetic to your perspective on issues, and tell them what you're doing. I'm running for office. I can.
Okay, so I understand that, but as the way that I see it, I don't just want anybody in those positions. I would want somebody who would help me learn together, the whole we don't know what we don't know type of thing.
Sure.
So like, yes, my friends would be ready and willing to help out if it was a matter of passing out flyers or reaching out to their connections. That's all happening. But as far as somebody who would be helping me, say, run my campaign per se, how do you get that person?
Well, you take a survey of all the people and you see who would be suitable. If you don't have anyone that's suitable, you're going to have to reach out to somebody that you don't know. I don't know if you're a member of a political party. A lot of times, if you go to a meeting, you might find somebody there who wants that experience. If you know any other candidates that are running for office, ask them who they know. You're right. You don't want to just get anyone in those positions. You're going to want to talk to them. You're going to want to see if they're really interested in helping. You're going to want to see if they have the temperament and the personality to help out. And you'll probably find someone if you're persistent. If you're in a small community and you just don't know anyone and there's nobody there, you might not. But most of the time, if you're persistent and you talk to the people you know and the people that you're associated with, or people who they refer you to, and have coffee with them, learn a little bit about them, you are likely to find people who are at least willing to learn and willing to help. They don't have to be, you know, for a lot of these local races, it's very common to have folks with no experience. It's very common for people to do things for the first time. And occasionally you'll find people that didn't realize that they had a natural talent for it. There are people who sometimes think they have talent and it turns out they don't. And, you know, if that happens, you know, these are usually volunteer positions and there are usually changes during a campaign. Something comes up, death in the family or a new job or something, and they have to quit and you have to find someone else. Sometimes that doesn't happen. But this is a learning process. And this is a place where mistakes are made. And this is a place where new people get involved. And, you know, if you learn to walk, you know, if you look at a newly born fawn trying to walk, it doesn't usually go well. Their legs are really rickety. They take a couple of halting steps. Occasionally they stumble. But if you are persistent, like the fawn is persistent, pretty soon you're walking and then pretty soon you're running. And over time, again, if you're persistent, you will find a team to work with. I don't know if that gives you the answer that you're looking for, but that would be my advice on finding people to participate. We're going to go over the specific roles very shortly, and that'll give you an idea of what it is you need, and that might help you as you meet with people and vet them and find out what it is that they're interested in doing and what you need. Is that helpful at all?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Now, the first person on a campaign team is naturally you. You're the candidate. That is the important thing. Now, one thing about candidates is they almost never have a clear understanding of what's going on in the campaign, particularly once they get emotionally invested. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. I've, on a couple of occasions, worked with new candidates who've never run before, and they would say, give a speech in front of the local Kiwanis Club or Optimist Club. And they would do a pretty good job. They would give a speech and answer a few questions. And then after the meeting was over, a few people would come up to them and ask them a few questions and tell them how they did. And usually it was very, very positive. And the candidate would come up to me and say, Rich, I know I'm going to win this election. And I say, well, great. How do you know? And he says, well, you know, everyone who came up to me after the meeting said they were going to vote for me. And I said, well, that doesn't mean anything. And they look at me stunned and hurt. And it's because the people who might have disagreed aren't the ones typically that stay after the meeting and go up and ask them questions. Typically, they just leave. Or people that don't know, they just leave. The people who come up and ask questions usually are people who are very supportive. Occasionally, someone with critical questions pops up, but usually that's not how it works. And my point there is that candidates don't always see things clearly. They can't be objective. And that's natural, especially for first-time candidates, because your name's on the ballot. Sometimes people take it personally. If they lose, they don't want to lose. And the things that happen, the adrenaline rush when they speak or when they talk to people, it can foul up their objectivity. So a candidate's 3 jobs in a campaign are typically, 1, be familiar with the issues, so you know what you're talking about, and be familiar with what it is you want to do if you're elected. The second thing is to interact with the electorate. Sometimes that can be, you know, one-on-one by knocking on doors or shaking hands or speaking in front of groups. Sometimes it can be indirect, like with if a newspaper article is being written about your race, it's, you know, indirect communication. And so that's the second thing. First, be familiar with the issues and what you want to do if you're elected. Second is interact with the voters directly or indirectly. The third is raise money. Talk to people, ask for money. Those are the 3 things that a candidate should do. If a candidate is doing anything else, they're not doing those 3 things. In a healthy campaign, those are the only things, you know, that a candidate does day to day. There are a couple of decisions they make beforehand, but day to day, those are the 3 things that candidates do, and ideally they do nothing else. in small campaigns without a lot of people, sometimes that's not practical and candidates do get involved in other things, but really try to limit yourself to those three things. And we'll talk about who does the rest in just a second. Now, Drew for Mercer County Sheriff just said, please repeat that. I'm happy to do it, but I don't know what that is to which you refer. So if you can, the three things that candidates do. Okay, the first thing they do is in any order, a candidate is familiar with the issues and what they will do if elected. They interact with voters directly or indirectly and raise money. Those are the three things that they should do: issues, raise money, and interact with voters. That's what they should do. Beyond that, you're going to have a campaign manager. A campaign manager is responsible for running the campaign on a day-to-day basis. Now, if you have a very large campaign, like if you're running for governor or US Senate or Congress or a very high office like that, you might also have a strategist. A strategist is somebody who builds a campaign plan. They are responsible for building the campaign plan and being the architect of that campaign plan. And then a campaign manager under a strategist is somebody who executes the campaign plan. Now, when a strategist writes a campaign plan, candidate gets to do one thing. They get to approve it. Once they approve the campaign plan as offered by the strategist, that is the plan, and that is what gets executed. And under a strategist, the campaign manager executes the campaign plan. And again, if you want to know about what the elements of a campaign plan are, go to westernlibertynetwork.org, click the training tab, and scroll down to where you see elements of a good campaign plan. Now, in a smaller campaign, you're just going to have a campaign manager. Campaign manager and strategist, the roles will be combined, and it will be the job of a campaign manager to develop a campaign plan. A campaign plan is a roadmap for you to win or to at least achieve the objectives that you want to achieve during a campaign, and then execute that campaign. Now, if you're dealing with people who are all new, who have never done these things before, sometimes the candidate has to work with the campaign manager a little bit, but try to give the campaign manager what they need to do the job. If they don't know how to write a campaign plan, again, send them to westernlibertynetwork.org and download the sheet on how to design a campaign plan and look at the video on how to design a campaign plan. Give your campaign manager the opportunity to do that. So the campaign manager is the top person in the campaign except for the candidate. Everyone else answers directly to the campaign manager, and the campaign manager answers to the candidate. Okay, and that is the way it should.
So it's like a butler.
It's
The
like
butler
a what?
works for a butler. A butler for the campaign. The butler works for the employer. Everyone else works for the butler.
That's right. That's exactly right. You might also
Okay.
call it, the chief operating or the chief executive officer of a company. All the staff works for the CEO, and the CEO is answerable to the board. It's that same kind of thing. The campaign manager answers to the candidate. And the reason for that is because if the candidate is involved, what you're doing is you're micromanaging the campaign manager, which will always drive them nuts. You're going around the campaign manager, which means you might be saying one thing, the campaign manager might be saying another thing, and that confuses the volunteers and causes you to have a very disorganized campaign. But third, if the candidate is working with the other campaign members, then the candidate is not doing what they should be doing: raising money, being informed on issues, and interacting with voters. And a lot of times, candidates don't like to do those things, particularly raise money. And so they look for other things to do instead. And so they end up, meddling in other areas where they shouldn't be meddling. And the reason why they shouldn't be meddling isn't because it isn't their business, but because they need to be doing the three things that candidates should do. And if they've chosen a good campaign manager or one that's learning well, then they don't need to worry about those details. And if the campaign manager...
So in other words, a good campaign manager direct the candidate to do the 3 things that the candidate should do. That's his job, to manage the candidate in that way. It's also the campaign
yes.
manager's job to manage the volunteers and make sure they're doing their job. Boy, he's busy.
Yep. Now he's a very busy guy, and that's why he needs people to help him or her. But you know, that's why you have a campaign plan. A campaign plan is approved by the candidate. So the candidate gets to look at the campaign plan, and the candidate gets to say yes or no. And part of that campaign is defining the role of the campaign manager and conferring upon the campaign manager the authority to work with other staff and to execute the plan. So once the candidate signs off on that, he or she is giving the campaign manager clearance to do their job and execute their plan, thereby freeing the candidate to do the 3 things that they should do. And the candidate should be disciplined enough to do it. But if the candidate starts incurring, or invading the authority of the campaign manager as defined in the plan, the campaign manager needs to say, oh, that's my turf. Or if it's over, or if the campaign manager is overwhelmed or completely lost, and you need to make modifications to the campaign plan, then do that. Make modifications to the campaign plan, which the candidate gets to approve. But, in all cases possible, leave the campaign manager alone to do their job. Give them what they need to learn their job if they don't know it already. It's okay if people make mistakes. For them, it's probably a learning process as much as it is for you. But this will all give you experience working on a team that is organized as it should be organized and functions the way it should function in accordance with a written campaign plan. Okay. The second person you need is a treasurer. Now, in a very, very small campaign, like if you're running unopposed for a soil and water conservation district board or something, and you just can't find anyone, sometimes you can combine the campaign manager and the treasurer. I say resist that as much as you can. Have a campaign manager, but have a separate treasurer. Above all, no matter what you do, never be your own treasurer. If you are a candidate, never be your own treasurer. There are some really good reasons for that. If you have a campaign in most states, you are responsible for doing campaign finance reporting. You have to report the money you raised, where you raised it from, how you spent it. There are some exceptions to this if you raise or spend very little money. For example, in Oregon, where I live, you don't have to report anything until you've raised $750. If you've raised $750, you can be exempt from reporting if you file a particular form, which says you will not raise or spend more than $3,500. If you exceed $3,500, then you have to report from the very beginning, as if you had never filed those documents. In your state, you might have similar restrictions, and so you might be able to spend very low amounts of money without doing reporting. But you should always be ready to do reporting, and at least you should always have somebody who's managing the checkbook, and it should always be a separate treasurer. The reason it should not be the candidate is because if a mistake is made and a volunteer treasurer makes that mistake, it's very easy to say, yep, a mistake was made. This treasurer is a good person. They're a volunteer, and they made a mistake and we're correcting it. And that usually, if it becomes an issue, that usually ends the issue. But if the candidate is their own treasurer and a mistake is made, then it can become a big press issue where they say, if the candidate cannot manage their own campaign finances, how can we expect them to manage the finances of our school district? How can we expect them, to do these things? And if the candidate says, well, I'm doing so much, I'm doing too much, and the treasurer on top of it, I just dropped the ball. If they say that, then that doesn't look good either. It shows that the candidate doesn't know how to delegate, manage, or recruit help. So it's always better if you have a separate treasurer that's managing the checkbook and doing the campaign finance reporting. Now, in a very large campaign, this is divided into two positions. You've got your treasurer that watches the checkbook, signs off on the forms, and the reports that are sent, to the reporting agency. But you also sometimes have what's called a campaign finance compliance director. That person is responsible simply for going over your books, going over the bank statements, online bank statements, and making sure that everything is reported properly. Like, for example, in Oregon, you've got cash contributions, in-kind contributions, out-of-state contributions, loans to the campaign, repayment of loans, forgiven loans, a lot of different categories. And if you run a large campaign with a lot of money, it can get very complex. And so for those campaigns, they oftentimes will have two people, somebody that's responsible for making sure that the campaign finances and reports are strictly in compliance with the law, and another one who's the treasurer, who watches the checkbook, looks at everything from the 30,000-foot record, and represents the finances to the campaign manager. So are there any questions about that? It sounds to me like most of you have smaller campaigns and just having a treasurer is going to be adequate. I'm making it sound a little more intimidating, a lot more intimidating than it is. Typically in small campaigns, finances are very simple. You take in cash or checks and you spend it. It's usually very, very simple, and it's usually not a lot of money. So the reporting is usually pretty easy, and keeping the checkbook is usually pretty easy. And for those kind of campaigns, which is what it sounds like most of you are doing, that's enough. But for the bigger campaigns, you're going to want to have that other person. If you have a candidate, a campaign manager, and a treasurer, you have the minimum skeleton for a campaign team. That is the bare minimum. And in this kind of a campaign, your campaign manager is going to have to wear a lot of hats. And occasionally the candidate will have to depart from doing the three things and sometimes help the campaign manager when he or she is overwhelmed. But those are your big three. If you can, try to get a couple more folks, okay? One of them would be communications or social media director. You need someone on your campaign who is willing to write press releases, send them to the local newspaper or to blogs or to radio stations to generate a little bit of news. Somebody who's willing to maintain a Facebook page or an Instagram page or whatever social media platforms you think are relevant, and update them from time to time with photographs from the campaign that might be taken by the social media director or the campaign manager or anyone. Use those photographs, update social media. You may decide in your campaign plan to spend some money on your social media to boost a Facebook post, for example. You can do those in very targeted ways. That would be a part of your campaign plan. But you're going to want somebody who is in charge of communications and social media. Sometimes in larger campaigns that split up. You've got someone who's doing press releases, who does interference and sometimes does interviews on behalf of the campaign, somebody that represents the campaign when the candidate's not representing himself or herself. And then you've got a separate social media director, somebody who is just a professional at doing social media and running those things. But if you're running a small campaign and you've got people that have never done it before, the communication and social media can be one person, and they can learn on the fly. All of these jobs, you can put someone in those positions if they're willing to give it a stab, and they can learn on the fly and make it clear to them that they are not experts in these fields, and that they have not done it before. That's okay. This is an opportunity to learn. If they make mistakes, that's okay, and that you're behind them 100%. That kind of support can make a big difference to people, and also makes it easier to get volunteers. Because if you have one or two people that agree to support you, and you are supporting them, and you are giving them, room to learn, and room to make mistakes, word will get around. They'll tell other people, and you may find it easier to get that third volunteer or that fourth volunteer, and however many volunteers you need. So the next person you need, if you can do it, if you can, including the candidate, if you can find 5 people, and I recommend that, it should always be possible to find 5 people to support you. And if you don't know them, it should be possible to find them. But that 5th person would be a field director, okay? Field director, as you might expect, will take care of everything in the field related to the campaign. For example, they'll do what's called advance work. If you are going to give a speech before the local Optimist Club, for example, the field director would be the person who maybe sets up a display table as people walk in and out of the meeting, with a couple of signs, with some buttons, with some donation envelopes, those kind of things. The field director would be the one that brings flyers and makes sure that everyone at the meeting gets a flyer. Those are important things that the candidate doesn't need to worry about, because the candidate's going to be preparing for the presentation by informing themselves on issues, what they will do if elected. They're going to be shaking hands with people. They don't want to look small by handing out things themselves. There should be somebody there, the field director, handing out flyers, handing out contribution envelopes, so that the candidate can do their job. Another thing a field director can do is, if you decide to do door knocking, field director can go with the candidate to knock on doors. I always recommend that you go in pairs. Don't go alone for safety. And Western Liberty Network has an entire training. In fact, the last training I did for Mises Caucus was on how to canvass your neighborhood. And I really encourage you to look at that and make sure that the field director has looked at that. Again, all of the roles that I'm describing to you, there's information about them on the training tab of the westernlibertynetwork.org website. And if people don't know how to do anything, send them there first. Have them look at the training materials, have them look at the training videos, and then let them try if they're willing to try, and let them make mistakes, and be gracious about it if they do make mistakes. But it's going to be okay. Motion carries with it its own momentum. And if you just get people moving, even if it's in a halting, stuttering way, eventually people will find their legging and things will move well. But a field director does advance work for events. A field director can sometimes go with the candidate, which anyone can do, to knock on doors. And the field director will hold the door hangers and hand them to the people if they answer the door. The candidate will be, hopefully nothing in their hand. They'll be able to offer to shake somebody's hand or otherwise use hand gestures as they speak so that they feel comfortable. Field director can also, if you have other volunteers that are willing to door knock for the campaign, the field director would be the one that organizes the field walking campaign. Teams up people together, gets them together in the morning, make sure they have donuts, tells them what streets they're going to cover, answers questions, sends them out, and then they come back at the end of the day, and maybe you have a pizza party at the end of the day, and you share your responsibilities, and the field director learns what their experiences were and tries to incorporate that into a future effort. Those kind of things are important for a field director to do. So make sure that you have that. Now, in a large campaign.
So that means if I have those people, those are actually the main people that okay. Candidate with a campaign manager, a treasurer, a field director, and communications director. With those 5 people, the candidate can concentrate on wake up in the morning, look on news sources, find out what the issues are for the race, learn about those issues, see if anything has changed that he needs to learn more about. Learn more about those things, and then whenever something happens, be there. And when you're before the public, you can answer the questions and not seem unknowledgeable. But if somebody comes up with a a question about something or an aspect of an issue you don't know about, it's okay then to say, okay, that's an aspect I'm unsure about. And I will learn about that and get back to you. Point to the field manager or the campaign director, say, get this person's name and number. I'll find out about it and I'll write something
because
to
I
them
want
and
to
say,
find
yes,
out more
this is
about these
about it.
people.
Okay, I'm sorry. Someone else was talking. I don't remember who that was. Scott that just said that what the candidate's free to do. Then I heard someone else talking. What was there another question?
What are your rooms that I can go?
Repeat. Sorry, you're cutting in and out a little bit. I couldn't hear very well, but let me respond first of all to that yes, the candidate should be focused on knowing the issues and what they want to do, raising money, and interacting with voters. That's what they should do. Now, a candidate does approve a campaign plan and select a campaign manager. Those are momentary things, but day to day, the candidate learns about the issues and what they want to do if elected. They interact with voters and they raise money. Those are the three things a candidate should do day to day. At the beginning of a campaign, they select a campaign manager and approve a campaign plan written that is created by the campaign manager. After that, the campaign manager manages all the other folks. The campaign manager manages the treasurer. The campaign manager manages the communication director. The campaign manager manages the field director. Does a good job of delegating, following them, and making sure that all of those people fulfill their roles and job descriptions as described in the written campaign plan, which has been approved by the candidate. Okay. Is that clear?
I had a question. So the election that I am running for is a special election. I have from now until November 7th, period.
Okay.
So it seems to me like setting all of this up and getting all of that going would, by the time I did that, it would be election time.
I've seen teams come together very fast from zero. I'm talking, like days. Now, all you can do is try. The worst you can do is fail. And if you fail in the process, you'll learn something that's valuable for the next time. It's the mid-August now. We've got September, we've got October, and we've got the first week of November. That's time to be effective. What is the position that you're running for?
It's city council.
Okay, and how big is your city?
So it's 35,000 people. It's 11,000 homes or 11,000 households.
Yep. Okay. That's a mid-sized city, and it's a lot of ground to cover. If I were
Well, and it's a large in the space that it takes up. It's kind of spread out.
Sure. Well, what I would do in your case, if I were your campaign manager, just knowing what you've told me, what I would do is I would come up with a plan whereby door walking would happen, but you would intersperse it. You wouldn't try to cover everything. You would sort of look at the city, what parts of the city you think you would get the best result from based on demographics, and then set up a sprinkling of door walking campaigns. You're not going to be able to knock on every door, but you'll be able to knock on 10 doors in this neighborhood, 10 doors on that neighborhood, sprinkle it around. People talk. Make sure you're going to want a good communications plan. You're going to want a letter to the editor campaign. You're going to want some kind of a social media campaign, whether it's paid or not. You're going to want to leverage the internet as much as you can. You're going to want to do as much door knocking as you can, sprinkled around the promising areas of your town. And you just need to find a few people. And a couple of months is enough to do that.
I apologize. In relation to the door knocking, I live in an area where I'm not going to do that. I'm 35 years old. I think if somebody came up and knocked on my door and didn't have an Amazon package, I'd lose my mind. So I'm not going to do that, but I do have a system or a plan in place where I reach out to HOAs. So where I have an HOA say, hey, can we put out flyers, say I'll be at your clubhouse this day to talk and whatever. I'm not knocking on people's door, and the people who want to listen and who are actually interested are there.
Sure. Well, see, this is what you would approve. You know, as a candidate, you would ask your campaign manager to write a campaign plan. And if they said door knocking campaign, as the candidate, you would be able to say, no, I don't want to do that. I'd rather approach neighborhood associations and HOAs. Okay, so the campaign manager would rewrite it to say that instead. But you know, you'd go back and forth until you had a campaign plan you could live with. And then once you could live with that campaign plan, you say, I approve this campaign plan. And from that point of view, or from that moment, it's out of your hands and the responsibility of the campaign manager. And if the campaign manager goes rogue, you know, you correct that person. And if they refuse to be corrected, then you find another campaign manager. Okay, or, you know, do whatever you have to do. But what I'm saying is, you know, what I'm talking about when I talk about door knocking campaigns, I'm talking about tactics. And the tactics you use is another part of a written campaign plan. You know, you've got your objectives, and there are, you know, three kinds of objectives. One, you want to win the race. That's usually the most common objective. The second set of objectives are things that will have value, you know, beyond the race, whether you win or lose. For example, you might say, I want to have 10 new media contacts. I want 20 new donors. I want to find 10 volunteers. Those are things that even if you lose the election, if you build those things, you will have a base to work off of if you ever decide to take on a future campaign or a future project. And there are tertiary campaign or tertiary topics. You may consider them secondary, it's up to you, but might be things like, I want to interject this issue in the race, or maybe I want to use my campaign as a platform to grow my county party, or any of those sorts of things. So that's your objective. Those are your primary, secondary, and tertiary objectives. That's also discussed in how to write a campaign plan. But then you've got, you know, your strategy and then your tactics. The tactics are what you're talking about. Door knocking is a tactic. Talking to HOAs and neighborhood associations is a tactic. Using social media is a tactic. There are any number of tactics you can do. And we have another training that you can look up, how to campaign with little or no money. And it comes up with a whole bunch of tactics that you can use. It's not exhaustive, but it'll give you some good suggestions on how to run with little or no money. And those are all tactics. So Sammy, when you find that campaign manager, write a campaign plan. It doesn't have to be a 50-page novel. It can be, you know, 3-4 pages, whatever you need. And in that campaign plan will be a list of tactics to be used to achieve your objectives. And you get to sign off on it. But once you sign off on it, it's out of your hands. And it's in the hands of your campaign manager. And your job should be to do the 3 things that every candidate should do that we've repeated a whole bunch of times already. Is that helpful to you?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So now the rest of this stuff is gravy. Okay, if you find people or if you're running a large campaign, the rest of these things are gravy. And the next one is volunteer director. Now you've got a field director, and they're responsible for things like, you know, doing advance work and making sure that people in the field have whatever it is they need, the flyers or whatever it is they're doing, holding signs if you're waving signs above bridges, making sure that that's all there, making sure that safety is being observed. If you're going to be doing particular events where the police might be involved, the field director might be the one that, you know, talks with the police department and finds out what restrictions they have. The field director would be the one to make sure that they obey the laws related to putting up signs, all of those kind of functions. But then you can have a volunteer director. And the volunteer director works closely with the field director. And of course, as you might expect, the volunteer director is responsible for finding and recruiting volunteers and then deploying them. using tactics that are chosen in the written campaign plan. So if you're going to do a door knocking campaign, or if you're going to make phone calls, or you're going to run some kind of a get out the vote campaign by working with your county or state party, whatever it is that you need volunteers for, waving signs, the volunteer director is the one that recruits them, makes sure they have what they need, make sure that they show up. If they don't show up, try to scramble and find people to fill in for them, keep track of who's reliable, who's not reliable, and continue to do those kind of things. Volunteer directors are great if you can get one. It's gravy. If you don't have a volunteer director, then that would, be a job that would also fall upon the field director. So the field director would be very busy. In an active campaign, if you have an active field director and you have an active communication director and you have an active treasurer, those three things alone, if they are doing good work on a daily basis or even a weekly basis, you can see that everything they're doing could never be done by one person, the campaign manager. You have to have people under the campaign manager. The campaign manager's job is simply to work with them, find out that they have what they need to do their management jobs, and follow up to make sure they do their jobs. And if something happens, like if there's a death in the family with one of them, the campaign manager would then, try to support that person or maybe replace that person. All of this so that the candidate will be free to raise money, be familiar with the issues and what they would do if elected, and interact with voters. And if you really want gravy,
Sorry about that.
okay, if you saw a stutter in the presentation, then you're not crazy. Due to a technical glitch, the meeting got interrupted, so we're resuming it now, and I'll splice these two ends together, so all is well. So continuing on, if you want more gravy on your team, get an information or research director. This person is somebody who will do a couple of different things. One is make sure that you have all the information you need. If there is something that came up with respect to an issue that you're concerned about, the information director will do some of that research for you and give you a ream of paper for you to read and make sure you have information that you don't have time to find yourself. Remember, the candidate, if they're doing their job, they're raising money, interacting with voters, and keeping up with the issues. And of course, finding information is keeping up with the issue, but if you have an information director that can do that for you, then that saves time for the candidate to do the other things that they need to be doing. An information director can also do opposition research. And this is research about, your opponent, things that would maybe discredit them or make it clear that they're not suitable to hold office. Now, you got to be careful with this. First of all, I advise people never to do anything that's personal. We don't care how many, it's up to you, of course, but my advice to people is we don't care how many times they've been divorced. We don't care, if they're gay. We don't care about any of these sorts of issues. We care about things that are relevant to them doing their job. But for example, if you're running for a position like a city councilor, if you're running for city council, which has a fiduciary responsibility, and information comes up showing that your opponent was arrested for embezzlement, that's relevant. Okay. If there's something relevant to the job about your opponent that makes them unqualified or unsuitable to serve, have your information research director find that information. Just research everyone. On high level campaigns, these are separated. You've got an information issue research person and you've got an opposition researcher. Sometimes in campaigns, larger campaigns, they hire private investigators to do full investigations of their opponent. And occasionally they find things that are relevant. Of course, if you get a whole dossier and some of it is personal stuff and some of it is relevant stuff, you as the campaign manager get to decide what's relevant and what's not. Now that's part of the campaign plan too. So if you're going to set criteria for what you'll use against your opponent and what you won't use against your opponent, that should be in your campaign plan. And
is this the person that would also research you? Because you don't want to find, let's face it,
Yeah,
I looked myself on the internet and I found that it's not me personally, but everyone with the name Boyd Smith
yeah,
died.
yeah.
So
Well,
I'm not dead. I check my pulse every morning because I'm old,
yeah.
but there's not
That's a
that
good
much
question.
about me.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I have a good answer for you. Okay. I'm going to tell you a short story about a woman who's actually a friend of mine. Her name is Monica Webby, and she was the Republican nominee for United States Senate back in, I think it was 2014. And she was on track to win. And Oregon's not it's not a red state. And she was on track to win. She would have been the first U.S. senator who was a woman. She was a neurosurgeon, very smart, and she had a lot going for her. But she did not tell her campaign staff that a few years earlier, when she was dating a big timber executive, that they had a big fight, and she was yelling at him from his driveway, and he called the police, and the police investigated, and nobody was arrested or anything, but it was the kind of thing where she looked like she was crazy, or at least she could be painted that way. Now, she's not crazy. She's very smart. She's, we all have had bad times in our lives, right? But she did not tell her campaign staff that there was a police report filed on her for creating a disturbance outside her boyfriend's house. And this wasn't found until the City Club of Portland debate, where it was on public radio statewide. It was covered in all the nightly news, and somebody brought this up, and it caught the campaign staff by surprise. And they did the worst thing that they could have done. They grabbed her and they got her out of there before the debate was over. And then they had to try and recover, and she never recovered from that. That's what happens because candidates, maybe not you, but in the broad sense, candidates and most people hide what they don't want people to see, and they lie about their past. And what I tell people in a race where I think this could be an issue, or in a race that's a high profile campaign, and this probably doesn't apply to the local races that you're running, but just so you know, if you ever run a larger race, I always demand of the candidate that I be given a budget to hire, and as part of the campaign plan that the candidate signs off on, I'm given a budget to hire a private investigator that I choose, who is independent of the campaign, to research the candidate themselves, to just do a complete roto-rooter. If they refuse to do it, I won't take the contract. If they agree to do it, then we get the report. And what I've learned is that unless you're a 5-state axe murderer, nothing is disqualifying, no matter what it is. If you had a drunk driving arrest 5 years ago, if you did time for a misdemeanor, whatever it is, it's possible to come back with a good response. Okay, you can say, well, that was years ago. I had a bad time in my life. I made bad judgment. I got help. I haven't had a relapse. Nothing else has happened. And I've contributed and served my community, and now I want to serve my community even more. I mean, if you have a response like that, if it's crafted right, you can, people are forgiving. Most people are very forgiving, and they'll forgive things as long as you have a reasonable answer, you take responsibility for things, and you need an independent private investigator that's hired by your campaign manager or your strategist if you're running a larger campaign to investigate the candidate. And then you have a very quiet meeting, a confidential meeting, where you share these things with the candidate, and that candidate should have shared them with you already, and say, how are we going to respond to this? How are we going to respond to that? Now, Monica didn't do that. And that's what happened. She didn't tell the staff about it. Even if she didn't hire an independent private detective, if she had simply sat down with her staff and just laid out all of these things for them, they would have crafted something good. But you can't always trust candidates to be honest about their past. And it's not always that they're lying. It's that people just tend to see things through a lens that is typically favorable to them. And it's their perception, and it's their truth, and it's not necessarily a lie. And it's not always a lie to be wrong. I mean, there's a difference between saying, I believe the earth is flat. And if you really believe the earth is flat in your heart of hearts, then it's not a lie. You're just wrong, right? These kind of things are what come up when there is a private investigation. And so in answer to your question, does that answer your question, Boyd?
It does. I mean, I'm pretty sure that if I ever have someone investigate me, they'll come up with some things that I look at that and say, wow, I forgot all about that.
Yeah.
Or that was 40 years ago.
That's right. That's right.
Oh,
Yep.
God, 40 years ago, I'm still an adult, but still.
Yep.
That was, I can't
Now,
expect to remember 40 years ago.
well, listen, I'll tell you, if your candidate balks and doesn't want to do it, and they say, what do you think I am, lying to you? You can escape that trap. Well, you can do a couple of things. First, you can say, yes. Or if you don't think they're lying to you, you can say things like, well, I don't think you're lying to me, but there might be things in the record that are wrong. There might be things in the record where it's a case of mistaken identity and someone else named Boyd Smith did these things. We got to find that stuff out. It's pretty hard for a candidate to argue with that. And a third argument is, of course, if you're running a larger campaign, which I expect all of you will do sometime in the future, you want to be able to tell your donors and your major contributors and your major endorsers that you have fully vetted the campaign, that you have hired a private investigator, and that the candidate is either clean, or if the candidate's not clean, we have resolved how we're going to deal with that. And that can turn a $500 check into a $50,000 check. That can turn somebody who's reticent about volunteering to wanting to join the campaign. Okay, that can bring skills to your campaign because it brings confidence to the candidate. Not everyone knows the candidate intimately. And if you have a private eye investigate the candidate, an independent private eye that's hired by the campaign manager or strategist, that brings confidence to the campaign. And it's pretty hard for the candidate to argue with that. And if the candidate argues with all three of those points, then lay your life down that he's hiding something or she's hiding something. So so that's what I have to say about information director and opposition director. Again, if you're running small campaigns, a lot of this doesn't apply to you. I'll say one thing about local campaigns. If you are running for a local position that is unpaid, okay, voters generally backlash against negative campaigns. Okay, you're not making big bucks, you're donating your time, and if someone is slamming you, voters hate that, and it usually will backfire on the person making the negative attack. That actually happened to me once. Within the Libertarian Party, we were having a factional battle. I'm sure that if any of you are involved with political parties, you've probably caught a whiff of that from time to time. And I was running for re-election to the Tualatin Valley Water District Board of Commissioners. And while a Democrat on the same board ran unopposed for another position, another Libertarian who was in a different faction decided that I needed to be kicked out and challenged my seat on the commission and spent $20,000 in hit pieces against me. The hit pieces were so extreme that a professor at Pacific University out here said it was the worst he had seen in 40 years. It made the national news for a day, and the most important talk show out here, the Mark and Dave show, before Dave died, unfortunately, but Mark and Dave, they did a show on it, and it completely backfired. I'd never had a negative campaign running against me before. I'm reading this thing and I'm saying, are people really believing this? And the answer was no. And a lot of the reason was because this was not a high level race. This was a water district and it was a volunteer position, and people smelled it for what it was. They spent over 20 grand in their campaign. I spent zero. I spent zero. I had things going on and I just wasn't able to campaign. I didn't take any of my own advice in that race. I spent zero. And I won with 65% of the vote, which in My 7 winning elections was the largest margin I ever had. It completely backfired. So my point here is, you know, unless something is relevant to the race and relevant to the position, don't go negative if you're running a volunteer local race, because people will respond badly to that. Instead, run a positive race about yourself. It's all right to contrast yourself with your opponent on the issues. It's okay to contrast your qualifications and background against your opponent for the issues. If you are new and bring an objective mind to it, use that as an advantage. That's all fair game. And if you do find something that's relevant to the position, it's all right to make it known. You know, send a press release, or better yet, if you're part of a political party, have them send a press release and let them be the bad guy that points out the negative campaign. But do not go negative unless it fits those criteria, or it will almost certainly backfire on you. The last position I'm going to throw out here is a scheduler. If you have someone who is willing to do nothing more than maintain a schedule from their, you know, Google schedule is fine. If you're running a small campaign, Google Calendar or Yahoo Calendar are perfectly fine. Something you can share. Make sure that everything goes through the scheduler. The scheduler is responsible for making sure that all of the deadlines are on there. If you have an event coming up, like a speech or a door knocking campaign or an event before an HOA, all of that should be on the calendar. If you're going to, you know, prepare beforehand, you know, how much time you need to prepare for lawn signs, put that on the calendar. When do ballots get mailed out? If you're doing mail ballots, put that on the calendar. If someone wants you to speak at a certain event, you check with the scheduling director before you say yes to make sure that there's not a conflict. The scheduler is important to have in a campaign that is active. Believe me, if you've got a treasurer, a communication director, a field director, you're going to need a scheduler. And if you got a volunteer director, you're going to need a scheduler even more. And then the last part of that, if you're running a large campaign, you're going to want the candidate to have a personal assistant. This is the only other person that the candidate can hire and fire. This is somebody who does nothing more than travel around with the candidate, making sure that notes are taken. If the candidate meets somebody that, you know, the candidate wants to call, make sure the personal assistant writes down the name, writes down the phone number. The personal assistant answers the candidate's phone and filters the calls and makes sure, is this something that the candidate really needs to do, or is it something that, you know, can be delegated or that the personal assistant can handle. You know, the candidate assistant carries the briefcase in, opens the door for the candidate, makes sure the candidate has water, encourages the candidate to get rest, encourages the candidate to eat right, you know, make sure that the candidate doesn't burn out. These are all things that a personal candidate, thank you, Sammy. Sammy's leaving. I'm a little bit over time, so that's okay. But I think Sammy got the big stuff. And this is, has this been helpful to you guys in terms of, did I just get disconnected again?
That's been helpful. I mean, there's some things that I didn't really understand at first that you made clear. And I went and looked at the Western Liberty website.
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably going to go back to it again and again.
Okay.
Yeah, because getting someone elected, I understand now, is more than just that person running. It's that person running and the people he selects to help him win.
Yep, or she.
Or she, yeah.
Not to be politically correct, but you know.
Well, I'm using me as an example, and I'm a man, so.
Sure. I'm a man, I'm a man.
Yeah.
Yes,
that song.
Yeah, that's a great song. But
Yeah.
anyhow,
I remember songs from the 60s, so
that's
I'm
fine.
old.
60s were great.
They
I
were
born
absolutely
in 63.
wonderful. I
Yep.
remember Beatles songs first coming out on the radio.
Yep.
That's
I barely
something. Yeah, but that's something very few people can say, because more of those people who can remember that are actually have died already. So, you know.
That's right. I'll be 60 in October. And I remember some of those songs coming on when I was a little kid, riding with my mom in her 58 Impala. And
Oof.
so I hear you, but I was just barely old enough to know what you're talking about. Barely.
Yeah,
That's
I was born in 65, so I was born like 2 years after you. But
gotcha.
you know, I can remember standing up in the middle of the car driving. Of
Uh-huh.
course, one time they had to stop real quick, and I busted out the rearview mirror. But
Sure.
hey, that gives you scars. Scars are cool.
Mishaps happen. Well, I'm glad this has been helpful to you. Matt, has this been helpful to you? Or that was Matt. Or no, it wasn't Matt.
No, that was
No,
Boyd.
that was Boyd. I just sent a message. I don't know if you could hear me right now.
I can.
Okay. So yes, I got a lot out of it, took a bunch of notes,
Okay.
and thank you very much for doing this.
Well, it was a lot of fun. I'm hoping that Mises Caucus will ask me to do more of this. And again, I encourage you to go westernlibertynetwork.org training tab and take advantage of every resource that you think will be helpful to you. And ask your team to do the same, because it will help them. As Yoda said, save you it will. So give that a shot. So if there's nothing else, we're going to end the meeting. Is that okay?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Take care and God bless. Bye.
Yep.
That's good.
You
Thank
too.
you very
Bye.
much.